Hello friends, my name is Marinés, and today we're going to be talking about some of my favorite middle grade books. This video is being sponsored by some Rick Riordan Presents fall releases. First up we have Paola Santiago in the Forest of Nightmares by Taylor K. Mejia. This is the second book in the Paola Santiago series, and these are adventure fantasies inspired by Mexican legends and folktales that star a science-obsessed main character. In the second book we pick up 6 months after the first book, and Paola is feeling very isolated and alone and almost estranged from the cast of characters that we met in the first book, and she's starting to have these nightmares that revolve around this forest and also her father, who she doesn't know very much about. And then we have Pawa and the Soul Stealer by Lori M. Lee. Our main character has a reputation for being sort of a weirdo. She can see and communicate with spirits, and in fact her best friend is the spirit of a cat that nobody else can see. One day Pawa accidentally untethers an angry spirit from a bridge, and shortly after her brother falls ill, and so she thinks the two are connected, that the bridge spirit has stolen her brother's soul. And so she returns to the bridge to do some investigating, and then also accidentally summons a demon. She is thankfully saved by a warrior shaman, and they team up to make their way through the spirit realm and try and save Pawa's brother. If you know me or my channel, you know that I read pretty widely, and I love to do so, and I make it a point to do so. So every year I make sure that I'm reading at least a handful of middle grade books. I love middle grade books, and I tend to slot them in times where I'm not too sure what I want to pick up next, or if I'm feeling a little bit slumpy, I know that I can always just blaze through a middle grade series. A lot of the themes and features of middle grade are things that I just really enjoy. Themes of coming into one's own, into one's magic, of self-discovery and family and found family, like just sign me up for it all. So I'm going to share with you some of my favorites. Some of these will not be surprises. Some of them are more recent reads, but these are all ones that I think are very much must reads. Okay, first and foremost, one of my favorite series of all times is the Fairyland series, and this is the girl who circumnavigated Fairyland in a ship of her own making by Catherynne and Valente. When we start the series, our main character September is 12 years old. She does age throughout the series until she's about 17 in the last book, but I feel like the series maintains this very middle grade sensibility, and the storytelling feels also very middle grade to me in sort of the simplicity of the plot, but you get all of these complex details and characters, and throughout it very much is a story of self-discovery, and you're building this extended family around September as a character. This is a portal fantasy, and at the very beginning, September is pretty unhappy and feeling a little bit stuck in her life. Her father is fighting an unnamed war, and so her mother has had to go into the workforce, so she spends a lot of time alone at home in a very gray sort of existence, until one day she's approached by a green wind riding on a leopard who invites her into Fairyland. And so in a very self-aware way, she decides to go on this adventure, knowing throughout that she has left behind sort of her family without a backwards glance, and knowing that fairy tales are often dark things that cost you. And so this entire adventure really is self-aware in the way that it moves through fairy tale tropes, and at the same time it pays a lot of loving homage to fairy tales in general. This is beautifully written. It is incredibly flowery and dense and detail heavy, so it isn't for everybody, but it is a story that is absolutely in my heart. There are characters here that are favorite characters of all time, and I highly recommend even the first one to see if you vibe with the writing style, but if you do, I promise you the entire series is an absolute treat. Next up we have Akata Witch by Nnedi Okorafor, and this is the story of Sunny, who feels like she doesn't have any place where she can really fit in. She lives in Nigeria but was born in New York. She is albino and she loves to play soccer, but she can't be out in the sun in order to play soccer, and so she has this entire existence that feels a little bit out of place until she discovers that she's what's called a free agent, which means that she has some inherent magical abilities. She steps into this magical world and she has a lot to learn about it, about her abilities. She does so with a group of 3 other free agents and their mentors, and just as they're learning their own magic, they're asked by the magical authorities to help track down a criminal who also possesses magic. I thought that this was so interesting for all of the things that it said about identity and how the magic and story were very much rooted in Sunny's identity identity and that feeling she had of not belonging. And some of the things that she viewed as weaknesses in herself were flipped and were tied to her magic. And this is true for all of the characters. The magic system and the plot itself feels very familiar for all of like the well-worn tropes that it uses, but it also feels fresh with the details of the magic, with the setting in Nigeria, and with sort of the darker and grittier edge that Okorafor gives them. I absolutely sped through this, and at the end, I don't know, I felt a little conflicted about it, but in the time since I have read this, I've thought about it so frequently, about the characters, the world, and the richness of the setting. If you are in the mood for a middle grade which revolves around like a magic school or learning magic, then this would be a great option for you. Along the same lines, we have The Mysterious Benedict Society by Tenton Lee Stewart, and this also revolves around a boarding school, but it is for like gifted young students. Some mysterious ads appear in newspapers that invite young kids to take these like very complicated tests, and 4 students are selected to then go undercover into this boarding school. And so they have to sort of band together to uncover what's going on there, and it is very much like part mystery, but also at the core of it is their friendship and their coming together. And I just love this. I thought it was so enchanting. I also really love the characters and just how quirky all of them were. And the thing that stands out to me about this entire reading experience is that it has probably one of the biggest 180s I have ever done on a character, like ever. The entire book I've spent thinking that one of the 4 characters was like my least favorite, and just being incredibly annoyed by the characterization and this character's quirks. But then you find something out about this character very close to the end, and it recolors how I saw like the entire thing, and instantly that character became my favorite. I was like, I misunderstood everything, and now that I know, I love it. So there you go. If you've read this and you know who I'm talking about, let's chat in the comments. The experience for me was just like, I don't know, so adorable. And it is what I primarily remember from reading this. Next up, we have the Underland Chronicles by Suzanne Collins. The first book is Gregor the Overlander. Everybody knows Suzanne Collins from The Hunger Games, and shortly after I finished reading that, I started reading the Underland Chronicles. These are so wonderful, and the top 2 things that I enjoy about them: 1, characters. Gregor as a main character and his little sister Boots. Just won my heart, and primarily the way that Gregor loves Boots, and how so much of this story revolves around Gregor's love for Boots and how he takes care of her, and how she also enters this like fantasy world as a very small child and like wins over characters, and everybody loves Boots. Everybody loves Boots. And I just loved that portion of the storytelling. I am big on like sibling feels within stories because I am very close to my siblings. So immediately as this, started up and you have Gregor taking care of his little sister in the most tender and wonderful way, I was sold. But the second thing that I really enjoyed about the series were all of the themes. It takes a lot of like themes that you see a lot of times in like chosen one stories or like middle grade fantasy, and faces them pretty head on, and talks about like cycles of war and putting a young kid at the head of like prophecies and putting this sort of burden on his shoulder. And so these things are not only included like you would see them included in other similar stories, but they are interrogated in really age appropriate but meaningful ways. I love that. Every time we got a trope, I felt like Collins looked at it slightly differently than I had ever seen it done before. So I highly recommend these, especially because not a lot of people talk about them. I feel like I don't feel like, I guess comparatively to the Hunger Games, not a lot of people have read them, but they are wonderful and they very much are worth the read. Next up, we have Ghost Squad by Claribel A. Ortega. This is a book about the main character Liesl. Right before Halloween, Liesl and her best friend Sid cast a spell that accidentally awakens malicious spirits that start wreaking havoc in St. Augustine in their town. So they have to team up with Sid's grandmother, who is a witch, and put everything to rights. When I say that this book saved my reading life, it is not an exaggeration, but I read this last year year, right in April. So like pandemic full swing. I'd just been laid off from my job. I was inside all of the time, living alone, and I wasn't really able to read. Like I was sinking time into other things, video games, but something like I had a block in my brain when it came to reading. And I picked up this book because I follow Claribel on Twitter, and they were at Book Fest a couple of years ago, and I just really wanted to support them. So I picked up their book and read it in a single sitting. I just flew through it, and the action and adventure and the pacing and the atmosphere of this like magical St. Augustine with like the vibes of like Stranger Things. It was just perfect. Exactly what my brain needed in that moment. I love the way that Dominican culture was woven into the story, and the way that the ancestors of the ghosts all felt like people I had met and people within my own family, and the way that like that idea of like these ghosts sticking around really allowed Ortega to explore sort of what it is to be tied into a really strong family structure, and what are the ways that those legacies live on in you, and the way that culture is passed down and sort of like absorbed by you. So all of that was wonderful. Next up, we have Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston. And in the story, Amari's older brother goes missing. And so as she starts to question what happened to him, she is brought into this world of magic. Before his disappearance, her brother nominated her to be part of this like magical society, and when she goes into it, she finds that she has a lot of magical potential and a certain specific skill that puts her at odds with this magical society, but she is determined to stick around and to learn what she needs to learn, all in order to find out what exactly happened to her brother. I love the story. No surprise. I loved all of these stories, but I love the story so much because it was so well paced. It did have those like magic school vibes that you want as you're learning about like all of the different creatures, and you're stepping into this world with Amari, who doesn't know anything. So you're learning right alongside her what everything means, what the structure of the world is, her place in everything, and as well as she discovers everybody else's place in it. But also you see like, again, the sibling feels her heart and her passion to find her brother against all odds. And I think the most amazing piece of this is that you have a Black girl at the lead of this, and you have really wonderful ways and mindful ways that her identity is integrated into the story. There are so many ways that she feels ostracized, but she likens it to some of the treatment she has received sort of in the outside world just for being Black or for growing up where she grew up. So I thought that all of those moments just spoke to my heart. Amari is also really used to being bullied, so all of the ways that that has like informed who she is and how she reacts to situations really spoke to my heart, and my heart just went out to her, because you see how much it has affected her, the way that people, her peers, have treated her kind of on the outside, but you also get to see her coming into her own, owning her power. Next up, we have The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. I can't decide which Neil Gaiman book is my favorite, but this is definitely like top 2 or 3. I just really, really enjoy this story that is about found family, but translated into a graveyard, right? So this little boy who has to grow up in a graveyard with a mysterious like dad figure, but also all of the ghosts sort of like communally raising him. Nobody, the main character, ends up living in the graveyard because all of his family is killed. And so even though there are dark things and dangers within the graveyard, there are dangers outside of the graveyard for nobody as well, because the man who killed his family is out there still. Throughout this whole book, this cast of characters is teaching nobody like very valuable lessons, and they have these moments where they're like asking him, do you understand? And his only response is like, a little, because there are a lot of lessons that we learn, and in the moment we only kind of see half the picture. But at the climax of this story, there are a lot of things that were taught to him, or experiences that he's previously had, that he patches together in order to kind of solve the big thing, or get out of the big climax moment. And that just felt so, I don't know, real to growing up, and to the way that even if you don't truly understand the lesson in the moment, in the future you can draw from those experiences. And in general, the idea of like growing up and crossing into adulthood set at a graveyard was just so wonderful to me, and so like not as dark as I would have imagined it to be, but also still heart-wrenching at moments, because I don't know, growing up can be. So Absolutely lovely, has so many of my feelings, highly recommend. And finally, we have Liesl and Poe by Lauren Oliver. This is a story that I have reread since reading originally, and I can say that it is incredibly simplistic. The story itself is really, really simple. It is about a girl who, after her father dies, is sort of locked up by her stepmother in a tower, very classic sort of fairy tale scenario, but she starts to see a ghost. On the same night that Poe the ghost appears to Liesl, a third character, Will, who is an assistant for an alchemist, messes up a delivery. And this big mistake has an impact for Liesl and Poe, and the three of them sort of have to team together. And the three of them are kind of lonely and alone in their own ways, but they find each other and go on this adventure. This book is one of those books that just came to me at the exact right time. Lauren Oliver wrote this book after the death of her best friend, and so it is a lot about grieving, about feeling alone, and obviously Poe is a ghost from the other side. And so the vague impression that Liesl has of him throughout this really also ties into the themes of grieving and of how do you move on and what happens next. So I found this book after suffering a loss myself in the family, and I just related to the feelings here so much. So even though the premise and the plot is very simple, the language is very simple, I think that if you've ever lost someone, especially if you are in a moment of grieving, if you come to this, there will be just so much for you to kind of hang on to and to see oh, I have felt that way. And I just super appreciate the story for that. That's it for me today. If you have read or would like to read any of the books that I've mentioned, let me know down in the comments, or let me know if you are interested in Paola, Santiago and the Forest of Nightmares, or Pawa and the Soul Stealer. Thank you to Rick Riordan Presents for sponsoring this video, and thank you to all of you for watching, and I will see you guys soon.